Rebels fans are feasting on the new adventures of Ahsoka, a favorite character is training to be a Jedi. Theories abound about a masked mystery man, and yes, the space whales are back. Here's the only breakdown you need about the third episode of Ahsoka. After a quick recap of the story so far, Ahsoka's third episode opens with a classic Jedi training sequence. As Ahsoka walks in the room, we see Huyang working on Sabine's sword skills, encouraging a technique that involves Sabine performing different attacks on the droid's 4 hologram targets. Huyang giving his best General Grievous impression as a vast collection of lightsabers, not unlike the General.
Fine addition to my collection.
In the first, but certainly not the last reference to Japanese culture in the episode, the drill is somewhat reminiscent of a samurai technique known as Tame-Eshigiri, which was used to test the blade's sharpness using a series of different cuts. Huyang not only has Sabine perform these moves on command, but his targets actually record the quality of Sabine's slashes.
Well?
Not bad, but not good.
The fact that Huyang is supervising this particular drill makes sense. He's a truly ancient lightsaber droid whose skills have assisted the Jedi Order in the art of lightsaber construction for many centuries, so he knows the weapon better than most. The fact that the droid quickly hands the reins to Ahsoka when she arrives also tracks. While Huyang is familiar with the ways of the Jedi, he's still a droid and thus can't use the Force himself. As such, he's happy to step back the second a higher-ranking samurai arrives to take over the training. Between Huyang and Ahsoka's training sessions, the show revisits a plot point from the show's second episode. When Ahsoka chalks Sabine's weapon handling skills up to the Padawan's Mandalorian training and asks her to focus on her mind instead, Sabine takes the time to inform her master about Huyang's swords and her talents.
Well, I discovered that according to Huyang, I'm the worst candidate to be a Jedi out of every Jedi he's ever known.
Ahsoka isn't particularly shaken by this information. Instead, she dismisses Sabine's lack of talent as unimportant and moves on with the training. You probably noticed, however, that the show isn't going to give Sabine much of a break when it comes to her subpar Jedi skills. More than likely, Ahsoka is either setting up a big moment when the Mandalorian finally finds her connection to the Force, or at the very least, Sabine will eventually find a way to boost those skills enough to beat Shin Hati during their inevitable rematch. It's fascinating to see that at this point in the Star Wars timeline, there are 2 potential Mandalorian Jedi between Sabine and, of course, Grogu. Though I think Sabine might have the better saber skills, just barely. After Huyang deems Sabine's lightsaber skills lacking, Ahsoka decides to take her training to a higher gear with a mind-honing combat training technique she calls Zatochi. This turns out to be a true Star Wars staple. The blindfolded training technique that made its debut all the way back in 1977 Star Wars when Obi-Wan Kenobi used it to train Luke Skywalker. Ahsoka's version of Zatochi involves a similar helmet, but instead of whipping out a training remote drone, she grabs a wooden sword and faces off against Sabine herself. Sabine starting from the beginning, she used to use the Darksaber. Talk about a downgrade. Star Wars has never shied away from depicting the Jedi as space samurai. And the Zatochi technique is yet another of this episode's references to Japanese culture. The name is a nod to the classic blind swordsman Zatoichi. Apart from the various times at which Jedi have honed their lightsaber skills blindfolded, Rogue One character Chirrut Imwe is essentially a Zatoichi XP in a sci-fi setting. As a cherry on top of the samurai cake, the training swords Sabine and Ahsoka use resemble bokin, Japanese wooden swords. Legendary swordsman and artist Miyamoto Musashi famously won one of his duels with such a weapon. Could this foreshadow Sabine's weapon of choice when she takes on Shin? By now, most Star Wars fans have a pretty good idea of the sort of people who prefer the light side of the Force, as well as the ones who are easily corrupted by the dark side. Ahsoka, being a Jedi outcast who nevertheless sticks to the light, holds a fascinating place on this sliding scale. Her white lightsabers reflect her status as a non-Jedi light side Force user. Try saying that 5 times. And the beginning of Ahsoka Episode 3 provides a sneaky reflection on the character's place in the grand scheme of things. Ahsoka's neutral good status seems to have given her a fairly rare power set. Apart from the formidable powers she boasted in the animated series Rebels, the live-action Ahsoka has already used a rare power known as the Force Echo. As she trains a blindfolded Sabine, she somehow manages to move from one part of the room to another in the blink of an eye, off-screen and unheard. Of course, it's possible that Ahsoka is just that good. However, it could also suggest that Ahsoka has access to Force teleportation, an extremely rare technique that tends to be more popular among those who use the dark side of the Force. Force teleportation or not, Ahsoka seems to have many surprise Jedi tricks up her sleeve. The live-action Ahsoka is also somewhat calmer and more mature than she used to be back in the day. And as her words of wisdom to Sabine prove, her peculiar status as a Force user has given her plenty of insight.
Anger and frustration are quick to give power. but they also unbalance you.
While Ahsoka and Sabine continue their training and make their way toward the Danab system, Hera Syndulla is on a mission of her own. Desperate to prevent the return of Grand Admiral Thrawn, Hera hopes to convince the New Republic Senate Committee to provide aid. This meeting with the senators is led by none other than Chancellor Mon Mothma, who most recently appeared on the Disney Plus series Andor after previously turning up in Rogue One and Return of the Jedi. Mothma makes mention of Hera's droid Chopper, showing that even the Chancellor of the New Republic is aware of the droid's heroic, though sometimes violent deeds for the greater good. At the end of the day, Hera's goal is simple: prevent the galaxy from falling into yet another war. She mentions to the group that for virtually her entire life, she has fought in various galactic conflicts. Her father, Cham Syndulla, famously led the charge against the Separatists on Ryloth during the Clone Wars and sought to battle the Imperial occupation of the planet once the Galactic Republic fell. She was right by her father's side through it all, and later led her own missions for the rebellion during the Galactic Civil War. Suffice to say, Hera understands war, which is exactly why she begs and pleads with the committee to help her out. In addition to wanting to prevent another galaxy-wide conflict, Hera is also meeting with the New Republic Senate Committee for personal reasons. As she explains to them, Thrawn is not a man to be taken lightly, describing him as someone who is much different from the average Imperial warlord. She knows this well, seeing as she's fought against him in the past, witnessing the kind of destruction he and his forces can rain down upon his enemies. Hera and her allies' conflict with Thrawn even resulted in the demise of her romantic partner, Jedi Kanan Jarrus, as seen in the Star Wars Rebels Season 4 episode Jedi Knight. Will someone please mention Kanan Jarrus? This man gave his life for the rebellion! Even though her reasons for wanting to enlist the help of the New Republic are reasonable, the committee is far from convinced. Most vocal among them is Senator Hamato Xiono, who is more than happy to shrug off Hera's concerns about Thrawn by insisting that he died years ago. He also expresses his belief that her close friend, Ezra Bridger, died along with him, which leads Hera to lose her cool slightly. Much like Sabine and Ahsoka, Hera is still holding on to some remnants of hope that Ezra is still alive, and she refuses to entertain any alternative. As the Senate Committee discusses her proposal and comes to a decision, Hera steps into the hallway. She then runs into her and Kanan's young son, Jacen, along with the incomparable astromech droid Chopper. Jacen last appeared in the Star Wars Rebels two-part finale, Family Reunion, and Farewell. Due to his half-human, half-Twi'lek biology, he sports a striking head of green hair in his animated debut, which has become one of his defining features to Star Wars fans. Thankfully, this detail has carried over into his live-action introduction. But I don't think the absence of the green-tipped ears and striking eyes will anger fans one bit. During their brief meeting, Jacen asks her about Aunt Sabine's Jedi training and tells her that he wants to be a Jedi too. This comment prompts a mildly concerned response from Hera, and reasonably so. After all she wants to do is secure a safe and happy future for her and Kanan's child, just as her parents wanted for her. She doesn't want him to put a target on his back by becoming a Jedi while the Imperial remnant gains power. However, it stands to reason the Force will call to him someday. Considering Kanan was his father, it's pretty much inevitable. Meanwhile, Ahsoka and Sabine sit down for a chat. Sabine admits to her frustration over her inability to use the Force, something she has been led to believe anyone can do. Ahsoka reassures her that, while talent is a factor, training and dedication are vastly more important. Ahsoka then heads to the cockpit to talk with Huyang while Sabine attempts to connect to the Force to move a cup. We've all had our own use the Force on an object moment. In fact, I'm trying to pour my coffee to me right now. On the topic of Sabine's progress, the droid doesn't hold back. He tells Ahsoka that Sabine is far from an ideal candidate to become a Jedi, and that the Jedi Order would never have taken her in.
She is not an acceptable candidate.
Still, Ahsoka isn't convinced that Sabine is a lost cause, noting that the ways of the Jedi Order eventually failed. Huyang points out that Sabine is one of very few Mandalorians to become a Jedi, so she's certainly an outlier. Then again, he also concedes that Ahsoka comes from a long line of non-traditional Jedi herself. Behind Sabine and Ahsoka are Anakin Skywalker, Obi-Wan Kenobi, Qui-Gon Jinn, Count Dooku, and Yoda, who all challenge the tenets of the Jedi in their own ways from time to time. Sure, some of the most powerful and iconic Jedi who ever lived, but also the root cause of some of the galaxy's greatest turmoil. At last, Hera makes contact with Sabine and Ahsoka, but she doesn't have much good news for them. Much to Sabine's irritation, the New Republic Senate Committee has decided not to send the New Republic fleet to the Danab system. It seems that Mothma and her fellow senators don't feel that the threat of Thrawn is one that requires any attention from the Republic. So Sabine, Ahsoka, and Huyang are left on their own, and it's all down to poor decision-making by the New Republic. And this isn't the last time this will happen either.
I got a bad feeling about this.
Almost from the very moment it takes over administration of the galaxy, the New Republic makes a series of notable missteps. The Republic's use of former Imperial agents attempts to give Imperial operatives amnesty, and ignorance of the strategic moves of Imperial remnant factions all helps sow the seeds of its own destruction. It's no surprise then that the regime crumbles after a mere few decades, falling into yet another devastating conflict, this time with the First Order. As we saw in Mando Season 3, the Imperial remnants are doing a fine job of evading the gaze of the New Republic, as a new order rises right underneath their feet. New Republic, Old Republic, Galactic Republic in Star Wars, it's just like poetry. It rhymes. Of course, this all culminates in the destruction of the New Republic Senate stationed on Hosnian Prime, after the First Order Starkiller base destroys the entire Hosnian system. Before Hera can elaborate further on the Senate Committee stance, the hologram is cut off. As their destination comes into view, it becomes abundantly clear that Sabine, Ahsoka, and Huyang are in for a fight. Ahsoka, Huyang, and Sabine enter the Denab system and see the planet of Seatos waiting beneath them. It's a quiet moment, one that is quickly shattered when Shin Hati, Marrok, and a number of other henchmen attack. The villains' ships are new, but their design feels old in a number of ways. The simple, wide front wing and tight fuselage evoke old real-world fighter planes, for example. Given that Dave Filoni has generally deferred to George Lucas's vision of the Star Wars universe, and that Lucas always wanted his space battles to pull from World War II dogfighting movies, this design feels like an intentional choice. The ships, especially Shin's, also resemble General Grievous's fighter from Revenge of the Sith. Others look similar in shape to the Naboo fighters featured in The Phantom Menace. There seems to be no astromech droids here though, and they appear to be much cheaper and more run-down fighters. The sound of their blaster cannons, however, is quite similar to that of the Naboo ships, and more high-pitched than your typical Star Wars fighter. Regardless, it seems likely that these fighters belong to Baylan and Shin's mercenary unit, rather than having been provided by Morgan. Though Morgan did help build ships for the Imperial Navy, Shin and Marrok's fighters bear no resemblance to any known Imperial vessels. They aren't even all the same model. Still, that doesn't stop them from using the patented green lasers of the Galactic Empire. Once Shin and Marrok attack our heroes above Seatos, it's on. Time to Fly makes good on its title, delivering a lengthy dogfighting sequence that pulls heavily from the franchise's past. As soon as Sabine hops into the tail gunner seat, it's hard not to think of the very first Star Wars and the escape from the Death Star. Han Solo and Luke Skywalker's gunner battle against pursuing TIE fighters is one of the most iconic scenes in the original trilogy, one to which Ahsoka clearly pays homage.
You know, sometimes I amaze even myself.
From the frenetic jumps between cockpits and pursuit shots to Sabine's jubilation at blasting a fighter into smithereens, this scene has all the trappings of a classic Star Wars dogfight. There are even little targeting screen readouts with retro computer graphics, a staple of Lucas's universe from the very beginning. Ahsoka even encourages Sabine to get back into the swing of things by blasting away a few no-name mercenaries. Classic Jedi training stuff. Sadly, we don't get much explanation about the other pilots under Shin's command, and most of them don't live past this scene. Still, their armor and helmets are quite interesting. It makes you wonder just how big Baylan's mercenary group is, what kind of jobs they've done in the past, and why they all dress like medieval knights. As Ahsoka bobs and weaves and Sabine blasts fighters out of the sky, they slowly move closer to the main attraction on Seatos, the so-called Eye of Sion. Revealed by Huyang to be a massive hyperspace ring, much like the smaller ones used by Obi-Wan Kenobi in the prequel trilogy, this installation is as awe-inspiring as it is unnerving. This is intolerable! Huyang channels his inner Dr. Henry Jones Sr., added to the list of Star Wars referencing Indiana Jones and vice versa. Though the ring was shown at the end of Ahsoka's second episode, we get a much better look at it here. Far from just a large engine, this hulking device is also equipped with a bevy of Imperial turbo lasers, which turn out to be more than a match for Ahsoka's T6 Jedi shuttle. Inside Morgan's command cabin, we also see a number of protocol droids manning the various stations. All in all, it's both an impressive feat of engineering and a frightening glimpse at what the Imperial remnant may yet be capable of. The name of the ring isn't mentioned here, but Morgan called it the Eye of Sion in Episode 2. That title seems to be an intentional reference to Darth Sion, a so-called Lord of Pain, and villain of Knights of the Old Republic 2, the Sith Lords.
I came to warn you, Jedi. You know not what path you walk.
As a Legends character, Sion has yet to be reinstated into the current Disney Star Wars canon. And since none of the characters in Morgan's retinue are technically Sith, this name is likely just a neat reference intended for die-hard fans. Morgan's attacks briefly incapacitate both Huyang and the shuttle as it flies through the Eye of Sion. While Sabine tries to fix it from the inside, Ahsoka puts on a spacesuit and steps out into the cold void to hold off the approaching fighters. The suit itself is a new design, but it pulls heavily from several familiar pieces of Star Wars gear. A much younger Ahsoka can be seen using a very similar Eva suit in certain episodes of Star Wars The Clone Wars. There are also some similarities in the design to the clone pilot outfits glimpsed in Revenge of the Sith, which makes sense given that Ahsoka's suit even has a Republic logo on the shoulder. Whatever you want to call the suit, it certainly does the job. Ahsoka lets loose with an impressive display of lightsaber skills, deflecting laser bolts and slicing one fighter clean in half. Ahsoka really channeled her master in her plan to fight off Shin and the other enemy fighters. An Anakin-type plan if I've ever seen one. Spinning, which is a great trick, and of course, venturing out into space-facing enemy fighters with her lightsabers. Sky Guy would be proud. Her heroics buy Sabine just enough time to get the ship back up and running, proving just what a great team they make when they're all on the same page. One of the more interesting parts of the dogfight in Time to Fly is the subtle banter between Shin Hati, Marrok, and Morgan Elsbeth. When Ahsoka and company make it past the first wave of fighters and advance towards the Eye of Sion, Shin begrudgingly calls Morgan to tell her that she's about to have company. Morgan's response is clearly critical.
I'm surprised you let them get this far.
When she fails to fully destroy Ahsoka's ship, Shin fires back,
Congratulations. You almost got them.
The tension here is a lot of fun, and this suggests some interesting implications about the nature of the villain's group dynamic. Baylan Skoll and Shin were hired by Morgan as mercenaries, and it seems that the other soldiers, including the ones seen guarding Morgan on the ring, work for Baylan. However, that hasn't been explicitly stated. We know from The Mandalorian's second season that Morgan has worked with hired guns before. So the crew seen in Ahsoka could be an amalgam of sorts, a combination of different mercenary teams. Either way, it's clear that neither Shin nor Morgan holds much respect for the other. Marrok, on the other hand, seems totally deferential to Shin, responding to one command during the dogfight with a simple, Marrok's identity is confirmed! Marrok is a masked menace, a few words, but his mysterious "as you wish" has me thinking he might just be the Princess Bride's Wesley. She's clearly Baylan's apprentice, and Marrok is a former Inquisitor, but he seems to be last in the hierarchy of the three. Why? That remains to be seen. Ahsoka's second episode features a blink-and-you'll-miss-it moment that sees the villainous Baylan look up at the sky and watch some dark movements floating through the clouds. Given that the planet is a gloomy, dreary hellscape, it'll be easy to dismiss these figures as a storm brews around them. However, this third episode reveals that they're actually purrgil, the giant space whales with close ties to Star Wars rebels. The purrgil creatures reappear as Ahsoka, Sabine, and Huyang fly into the gray skies of Seatos with Shin and Marrok in hot pursuit. Despite having to fend for their lives, Ahsoka and Sabine are happy to see the deep space-traveling creatures, and they manage to squeeze the T-6 craft between them in order to make a daring escape. Of course, this isn't the first time purrgil have appeared in a live-action Star Wars TV series. The Mandalorian Season 3 premiere featured a purrgil sighting as well, which got fans buzzing about what their presence could mean for the franchise's future. The general sentiment is that they were introduced to foreshadow the return of both Ezra Bridger and Grand Admiral Thrawn. After Time to Fly, this theory has garnered yet more credibility, and the creature's appearance seems to have inspired some hope among the main characters of Ahsoka. Purrgils don't look so soft and cuddly in live action. In fact, they look rather scary. In Episode 3, Sabine mentions that she hasn't seen any purrgil since Ezra disappeared into hyperspace. While she's yet to discover what actually happened to her old ally following his showdown with Grand Admiral Thrawn, bumping into the space whales seems to have made her feel optimistic about his survival chances. Sabine doesn't discuss her feelings in Episode 3, but a smile appears across her face when she tells Ahsoka about the last time she saw the whales and their significance to Ezra. Ahsoka and Sabine needed something to feel optimistic about following the New Republic Senator's decision to reject Hera's request to support their cause to find Ezra. Hopefully the purrgil sightings have accomplished that. Remember Ezra held a unique connection with these star whales as we've seen them appear more often? Could it be that Ezra is trying to send a message similar to Thrawn contacting Morgan Elsbeth? Only time will tell. Besides, it's highly likely that Ezra is alive. For a start, the premise of the entire series is about our heroes finding him and putting a stop to Thrawn. It'll be a major buzzkill if they travel to the deepest recesses of hyperspace only to find him dead. Plus, we already know that Thrawn is still alive, as the first two episodes see Morgan Elsbeth confirm that she's been in contact with him. If Thrawn survived his journey, then it's only right that Ezra did as well. That said, some fans believe that Ezra has been hiding in plain sight this entire time. The true identity of Marrok has been a hot topic among the Star Wars fanbase, with some aficionados speculating that the masked Inquisitor might be Ezra. This is because his name has a connection to wolves, both in the Star Wars franchise and pop culture as a whole. In Star Wars The Clone Wars, the bounty hunter Embo has a wolf-like pet that goes by the name Marrok. Elsewhere, Sir Marrok is a brave knight from Arthurian legend who was turned into a werewolf by an enchantress. And we all know that the Star Wars franchise loves paying homage to old-school pop culture about formidable warriors. Furthermore, Ezra has a close relationship with the Lothwolves of Lothal in the animated series, so it's understandable why some fans believe that he might be the master villain on Ahsoka. However, Marrok doesn't show any real emotion toward the purrgil pod in Episode 3, suggesting that he's never had a significant connection to them that might reawaken his inner Ezra. If he was the missing Jedi, his reaction to the creatures seems like it would have been a little more than just a head turn. The fact that his voice is heavily modulated by his helmet indicates that he's probably hiding something, but the idea of him eventually being a Master's Ezra seems too out of left field. Additionally, Marrok being Ezra defeats the purpose of him being lost in hyperspace with Thrawn, as well as the notion that their fates are inextricably linked. Rebels makes it clear that Ezra banishing Thrawn meant the same outcome for him, though it certainly would be interesting to discover that Ezra wound up joining Baylan and Shin's team instead. Marrok's spooky voice sure sounds like a huge red herring if you ask me. My best guess is still Wesley. Hyperspace travel within a single galaxy has always been possible in the Star Wars universe, but Ahsoka has loftier ambitions for getting across the universe. The Eye of Sion hyperspace ring will allow whoever uses it to make the jump to a neighboring galaxy, and the purrgil migration paths are key to its success. The Eye could even be used to transport the Star Destroyer Chimera, the feared vessel of the Grand Admiral Thrawn, into the Central Galaxy. I bet the New Republic would take notice then. This is quite a significant development that could expand the Star Wars universe in a big way. Ahsoka has confirmed that the giant space whales are capable of traveling through different galaxies, and that opens up a world of interesting possibilities. Theoretically, there could be several ancient neighboring galaxies in this universe outside of the one that Ezra and Thrawn currently dwell in on Ahsoka, with the purrgil creatures being the main method of transport between them.
Could a ring like that make a jump to a neighboring galaxy?
Theoretically, if one knew the coordinates and navigation, yes, I believe it could.
In Episode 2, it's revealed that the path to Beridia, the highway between galaxies on which Baylan, Morgan, Shin, and Marrok hope to travel, was once thought to be a fairy tale. However, Morgan says that all fairy tales are based on some type of truth, implying that Ahsoka will delve deeper into the history of the cosmos and add more depth to the franchise's lore. What other ancient realms have become lost throughout time and only exist in mythical stories? Of course, the lengths the villains have to go through to build the Eye of Sion also indicates that traveling between galaxies is extremely difficult, which explains why more denizens of the Star Wars universe haven't tried it in the past. At the same time, maybe Ahsoka will reveal that it's more common than we'd been led to believe this entire time.